I had it all. The perfect life. Or so I thought. And then one day, it all came crashing down. What was once a marriage filled with promises and laughter became a battlefield of broken dreams and betrayal. But as the dust settled, I realized something: I was not defeated. I was reborn. And tonight, at the gala, everyone would see it. They would see me. Rachel Turner, not just the ex-wife, but the woman who had risen from the ashes to become the real boss. I stood at the podium, feeling the weight of every eye in the room on me, but it wasn't the kind of pressure that would break me. It was the kind that made me feel alive, powerful, and in control. Ethan had always been the one who thrived on attention, but this time, the attention wasn't on him. It was on me. The applause was deafening as I wrapped up my speech, but I didn't let it go to my head. This wasn't about the applause. This was about showing everyone, including Ethan, that I had made it. The woman I had become was no longer someone who stood in the shadows. I had stepped into the light, and I wasn't afraid to stand there. As the room calmed down, I glanced over at Ethan, who was now standing in the corner with Tara, trying to mask his discomfort with a forced smile. He didn't look as confident as he used to. His eyes were locked on me, wide with disbelief, unable to look away. He had always been the star of his own story, the center of attention, and yet now, in front of everyone, he was relegated to the background. I caught a glimpse of Tara, his new wife, the woman he had chosen to replace me. She stood there, rigid, her eyes scanning the room, but it was clear she wasn't enjoying the attention as much as Ethan had expected. I had to admit, there was a part of me that felt satisfaction in seeing him this way. The man who had once torn me down was now the one struggling to keep his composure. It was a moment I had dreamed of, but never thought I'd actually get to experience. Tara, no matter how stunning she looked on his arm, couldn't hold a candle to the woman I had become. I had rebuilt myself from the ground up, while he had only surrounded himself with people who fed his ego. But tonight, the game had changed. As I made my way off the stage, a sense of calm washed over me. The night was still young, but the impact I had made had already been set in stone. The whispers started almost immediately. I could hear the buzz as people around me spoke in low tones, their words filled with admiration. "Isn't she the one who used to be married to Ethan?" one voice whispered. "I heard she owns that big tech company now," another replied. I didn't need to hear the rest. I knew what they were thinking. I had done it. I had become the woman everyone thought I couldn't be. I had outgrown my past. The woman I was now had the power to take over any room she walked into, and tonight, that room was mine. I moved through the crowd, my heels clicking rhythmically against the floor, each step reaffirming my strength. I felt eyes following me, but I didn't flinch. I didn't look back. Ethan had thought he could break me. He had thought I'd crumble without him. But here I was, standing tall, the real boss, and there was no way he could ever take that from me. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, even as I moved away from the stage. The room seemed to hum with energy, a quiet murmur of shock and admiration. I had done it. And as I passed through the crowd, I could hear snippets of conversations, each one more thrilling than the last. "She really did it," someone whispered. "Did you see her? She's the real deal." The air was thick with the buzz of people finally seeing me for who I had become, not the woman who had been abandoned, not the ex-wife, but Rachel Turner, the woman who had clawed her way to the top. As I walked, I caught Ethan's gaze again. His eyes were wide, almost lost, as he looked at me. The confident man who once saw me as nothing more than a stepping stone in his life now stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Tara, standing beside him, had nothing left to offer but a cold, tight smile. Her presence, no longer shining so brightly beside him, now seemed almost insignificant. I could see the discomfort in her eyes. She had been groomed to be the perfect accessory to Ethan's life, but the truth was, she didn't belong here. I did. My past had been littered with struggles, but now I was in control, and no one, not even Ethan, could take that away. As I moved toward the bar, I smiled to myself, feeling the familiar heat of victory rise in my chest. I was no longer playing a supporting role in his life. I was the lead now. The bartender, a young man with a friendly smile, approached me with a drink, clearly recognizing me from the event. "Miss Turner, your usual?" he asked, his voice filled with respect. "Please," I replied, taking the glass from him. It wasn't just a drink, it was a symbol of how far I had come, of how much power I had gained over the years. I glanced back at Ethan, and for a moment, I saw something in his face that made my heart skip. Regret. Real, palpable regret. He knew, in that moment, that he had underestimated me. He had always thought I was weak, that I wouldn't survive without him. But I had. And now I was thriving. The door opened behind me, and I turned instinctively, sensing someone entering. To my surprise, it was Alexander, my partner, my ally, the man who had been by my side when the world turned its back on me. He walked toward me with a quiet confidence, his presence undeniable. As he approached, I felt a rush of warmth. He had been the one to believe in me when no one else did. And now, he was here with me, a stark contrast to the man I had once been married to. Ethan's eyes flickered nervously as he saw Alexander. I could practically hear the wheels turning in his head as he processed the situation. Alexander reached me, his hand resting gently on my lower back. His presence was a reminder of how far I had come and of the life I had built for myself, one that was strong, independent, and not defined by my past. "I see you've made quite an impression," Alexander said softly, his eyes gleaming with pride. I smiled, a genuine, satisfied smile. I just reminded them who I am. As I looked at Ethan. One final time, I saw it, the realization that I had won. Not only had I regained control of my life, but I had built something even more valuable. Ethan was standing at the edge of his own world, unable to comprehend how everything had changed, how I had become everything he had tried to destroy. But this was no longer his victory to claim. This was mine. And as the night unfolded, the world would know that Rachel Turner was not to be underestimated. I stood there, my back straight and my heart steady, watching as the night unfolded before me. Ethan was still at the bar, his gaze fixed on me, but now it was different. The confidence he once exuded had evaporated, replaced by a silent, invisible weight. The same man who had once mocked me, belittled me, and tried to destroy my confidence was now a mere spectator in my life. As I stood there, feeling the pulse of the room around me, I realized just how far I had come. The path had been long, and it hadn't always been easy, but every step had led me to this moment, and I wasn't going to let it slip away. Alexander, standing beside me, was a steady presence, the calm in the storm. He was more than just a partner, he was the person who had believed in me when no one else did. The man who had seen the strength in me long before anyone else noticed. The whispers of the crowd had not stopped since my speech. Every few seconds, I could hear their voices, hushed and filled with admiration. "She's incredible," someone murmured. "She's changed everything." I could feel the weight of their words. They weren't just talking about a woman who had rebuilt herself, they were talking about a woman who had done the impossible, who had taken the world's judgment and turned it into fuel for her fire. I caught sight of Ethan again, this time with Tara by his side. He was trying to regain some composure, but it was clear that the tables had turned. Tara's smile was tight, but it was no longer a smile of triumph. It was the smile of someone who was watching her carefully constructed world begin to crack. I didn't know what Ethan expected, but it clearly wasn't this. He had thought he could discard me, that I would fade into nothing. But tonight, he was facing the reality of his own mistake. I wasn't his to control anymore. I wasn't anyone's. I was Rachel Turner, the woman who had built herself up from the ground, who had turned every insult, every rejection, and every moment of pain into the foundation of her success. As the night wore on, the sense of victory didn't fade. It only grew stronger. The conversations around me changed. They weren't talking about Ethan and his new life anymore. They were talking about me, about how I had proven them all wrong. About how I had stepped into a life no one thought I could have. Alexander turned to me, his hand brushing against mine in a quiet gesture of support. "You did it," he said, his voice low but filled with pride. I smiled, a small but genuine smile, feeling the warmth spread through me. "I didn't just do it," I replied, my voice firm. "I'm just getting started." The night was mine, and for the first time in a long time, I could finally say that I was exactly where I was meant to be. And Ethan, well, he would have to live with the consequences of underestimating me for the rest of his life. I walked through the crowd, my heart still beating with a steady rhythm, the sound of my heels clicking against the floor. The applause had faded, but the feeling of victory lingered, thick in the air. I had done it. I had taken everything that was thrown at me, every insult, every tear, every betrayal, and turned it into something powerful. I was no longer the woman who cried herself to sleep, wondering where it all went wrong. I wasn't the ex-wife who had been left behind. I was the one who had moved forward. As I passed by Ethan again, I couldn't help but glance at him. His face was a mixture of disbelief and something else I couldn't quite place. Regret, maybe. For a brief moment, I saw a flicker of something real in his eyes. But I wasn't here for him. I wasn't here to give him closure. I was here to show everyone, including myself, that I was enough. Ethan's gaze followed me, but I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. He had once been the center of my world, but now, I was the one who owned the room. Alexander was right by my side, the quiet strength I had always needed. He didn't need to speak. His presence was enough. It had always been enough. The years spent building my company, the countless hours of hard work, the sacrifices I made, everything had led to this moment. I had transformed, not just for me, but for everyone who ever doubted me. For Ethan, who thought I would fall apart without him, and for myself, because I knew I could never go back to the way I was. As the evening wore on, I found myself in conversation with people I had once admired, now coming to me for advice, for direction. They saw the strength in me now. They recognized the woman I had become. Ethan and Tara were still standing at the bar, a few feet away, but this time, their whispers were not about me. No, the focus had shifted. It was about how far I had come. It was about my success, my growth. They had no idea how hard I had fought to get here, how many sleepless nights I had endured, how much of myself I had poured into making something that was mine. I caught a glimpse of Ethan, his hand resting on Tara's arm, but his eyes were still on me. There was no pride there anymore, only an uncomfortable silence. It was clear that he hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected me to rise up, to not just survive, but to thrive. But here I was. Alexander smiled at me, his support unwavering. "You've shown them, Rachel," he said quietly, but there was a pride in his voice that matched the pride swelling in my chest. I turned to him, my heart full. "No," I replied, shaking my head slightly. "I've shown myself." The night continued, but in that moment, I knew one thing for sure, I had become the woman I was always meant to be. And no one, not even Ethan, could take that from me. I could feel the energy of the room shifting as the night went on. People were still talking, but it wasn't about the latest gossip or the superficial things that used to dominate their conversations. No, it was about me. I had become the topic. And not in the way Ethan had once imagined. There was no longer any trace of pity, no condescension. They saw me for who I was now. The woman who had not only survived but had built a legacy from the ashes of her past. Ethan stood across the room, still trying to put on a brave face, but I could see through the act. He had always been good at pretending, at wearing the mask of the successful man, but the truth was written all over his face. He was struggling. And I was thriving. As I moved through the crowd, my steps were steady and confident. Alexander stayed close by, his presence grounding me, but I didn't need anyone to steady me anymore. The old me, the one who had once been uncertain, unsure of her place, was gone. In her place stood a woman who had earned every bit of success she had, and I was ready for more. I heard a voice behind me, a familiar one, but one I had not expected to hear tonight. It was Jessica, my old friend from years ago. She had been there when things were at their worst, when Ethan's betrayal had left me shattered. And now, she was here, looking at me with a smile that spoke volumes. "Rachel," she said, her voice warm with admiration. "I didn't expect to see you here tonight. But I should have known." I smiled back, the weight of the years lifting off my shoulders in that one simple moment. "I wasn't sure either," I replied, my voice steady, "but sometimes, you have to show up for yourself." Jessica nodded, her eyes bright with understanding. "You've done it. You've shown them all." I couldn't help but feel a swell of pride at her words. But I wasn't finished yet. This was just the beginning. I was no longer the woman who had been reduced to a footnote in Ethan's story. I was the author of my own. The night continued, and the conversations around me shifted, with more and more people coming up to congratulate me, to recognize the woman I had become. It was all I had ever wanted. To be seen, to be respected, to be enough. And now, I was. Ethan's eyes followed me wherever I went, but I didn't flinch. I didn't look back. He had no power over me anymore. The final moments of the night came, and I stood with Alexander, feeling the weight of the evening's events settle in. It had been more than just a night of celebration. It had been a declaration. I was here to stay. I had built my own empire, my own life, and no one would ever take that from me. Ethan could look at me all he wanted, but he would never see the woman I was now. I had outgrown him. And as I looked around the room one last time, I knew that the future was mine. The past was behind me, and all that mattered now was what I was going to build next. With Alexander by my side, I knew that anything was possible. This was only the beginning. I stood by the window, looking out over the city. The soft glow of the lights below illuminated the night, but I was no longer focused on the outside world. Inside, everything had changed. I had built this life, brick by brick, and it felt more solid than anything I had ever known. The past, the pain, and the betrayals, all of it had led me to this place, to this moment. And now, as I looked out, I could see it clearly. This was my life, and no one could take that away from me. Alexander stood beside me, his presence a constant reminder of how far I had come. He had been there when I needed someone to believe in me, when no one else did. His quiet strength had given me the courage to keep going, even when I felt like giving up. He was not just my partner, he was the person who had helped me find the woman I had become. As the city buzzed below, I couldn't help but think of Ethan. He was still a shadow in my life, but he was no longer the central figure he had once been. I didn't need him to validate my worth anymore. I had learned that the hard way, but it was a lesson I would never forget. Ethan had been a part of my story, but he no longer controlled the narrative. That was mine to write now. A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts, and I turned to face it. When I opened it, it was Jessica again, a warm smile on her face. "I just wanted to say, Rachel," she began, stepping inside, "that tonight, you were incredible. I knew you had it in you, but seeing you up there, it was something else." I smiled back, grateful for her support. "Thank you, Jessica. It means more than you know." She nodded, her expression serious. "You've changed the game, Rachel. People are talking. You've done what most people could only dream of. And I know Ethan didn't expect this. He thought he'd left you behind." I took a deep breath, feeling a quiet strength rise within me. He thought he could break me. But he didn't. And now, he's left with the consequences of his own choices. Jessica smiled, clearly proud of me. "He's not the only one. You've made something real. Something that can't be taken away. As she left, I turned back to the window, my reflection joining the city lights. The road ahead was mine to shape, and I wasn't going to let anything stand in my way. I had built this life, and I would continue to build it, stronger than before. Ethan was a distant memory now, a part of my past. I was ready for the future. A future that I had created. I knew the journey wasn't over. But for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. I was exactly where I was meant to be. And nothing, no one, could take that from me. I woke up to the soft glow of the morning sun filtering through the blinds. The room felt peaceful, the silence a stark contrast to the whirlwind of the previous night. I could hear the distant hum of the city waking up, but here, in this moment, everything felt still. I lay there for a few moments, just taking it all in. This was my life now. I had fought for it, built it from the ground up, and now I was living it on my own terms. There was a time when I would have been paralyzed by doubt, wondering if I was enough, if I could keep going. But that time was over. I was more than enough. The journey had been long and difficult, but every step had led me here, to this moment of peace and clarity. I smiled to myself, knowing that the real work had only just begun. I had the freedom now to shape my future however I wanted. My thoughts drifted to Alexander. His quiet strength had been a constant presence in my life, and I couldn't imagine going through this journey without him by my side. He had been there when I doubted myself, when I questioned whether I could really make it. He had always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. And now, standing beside him, I felt like I could do anything. The phone buzzed on the nightstand, snapping me out of my thoughts. I reached over and saw a message from Jessica. I heard the board loved your proposal. They're ready to move forward. Congratulations, Rachel. I couldn't help but smile. It was just one more piece falling into place. The company, my company, was growing, expanding, and the recognition was finally starting to pour in. I had always known that the work I was doing was meaningful, but seeing it come to life in such a tangible way was something else entirely. I replied quickly, thanking her for the support. As I set the phone down, I thought about everything that had brought me here. The struggle, the heartache, the moments of doubt, they had all led me to this moment of success. I had not just survived, I had thrived. And the best part was, I wasn't doing it for anyone else anymore. I was doing it for me. The woman I was now was nothing like the woman who had walked away from Ethan years ago. I had grown, I had learned, and now I was unstoppable. The sound of the shower running in the background reminded me that the day was waiting. There were meetings to attend, decisions to make, and more steps to take on this journey. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt ready. The future was mine to create, and nothing was going to stop me. As I stood up and moved toward the shower, I looked out the window one last time, a smile playing at the corners of my lips. It wasn't just a new day. It was a new chapter. And I was writing it all on my own. I stood at the office window, looking out at the skyline. The city seemed smaller from here, quieter, as if it were pausing for a moment to acknowledge the changes in my life. I had spent so many years thinking of my success as something just beyond my reach, always striving for a future I wasn't sure would ever come. But now, here I was, exactly where I was meant to be. The company was growing, my influence expanding, and there was a sense of peace settling over me that I had never known before. As I sat down at my desk, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Alexander. Tonight. You, me, and a celebration. We've come a long way. I smiled to myself. It had been a long time since I felt like I truly had something to celebrate, but now, everything was falling into place. I responded, simply, I'll be ready. The day was filled with meetings, numbers, and decisions. The weight of the responsibility I carried was never far from my mind, but now it didn't feel burdensome. I embraced it. I had learned that success didn't just come from doing the work, it came from owning it, from believing that I had earned every part of it. By the end of the day, as I prepared to leave the office, I realized that I was no longer worried about the things I used to fear. I no longer cared what Ethan thought or what anyone else thought. I had done it. I had built this life on my own, and it was stronger than I ever imagined. I walked out of the office, my heels clicking on the polished floors, and caught a glimpse of myself in the reflective glass of the elevator doors. The woman staring back at me was confident, poised, and unapologetically successful. She wasn't the woman who had cried over lost love, over betrayal. She wasn't the woman who had questioned her worth. She was Rachel Turner, and she was unstoppable. As I stepped into the waiting car, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. Alexander was waiting for me at the restaurant, the one he had chosen for tonight's celebration. It was just the two of us, a simple evening of enjoying everything we had worked for. The drive to the restaurant was quiet, but it wasn't uncomfortable. I wasn't running from anything anymore. I wasn't hiding from my past. I was simply living, fully aware of how far I had come. When I arrived at the restaurant, Alexander greeted me with a smile, his arms open in a gesture that spoke volumes. We didn't need words tonight. We both understood. You did it, he said as I sat down across from him. We did it, I replied, my heart full. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to relax. This was my moment, and I was going to savor every second of it. The evening stretched on, each moment settling into place as effortlessly as the soft rhythm of the music playing in the background. The gentle clink of glass against glass, the laughter of those around us, it all seemed like a distant hum. It wasn't that I wasn't present in the moment, it was that, for once, I didn't feel rushed. I didn't feel the weight of expectations pressing on me. I had worked so hard to get here, but now I was simply living. I was in control, and the world was unfolding exactly as I had envisioned. The conversation with Alexander flowed easily, as it always did. He wasn't just a partner in business, he was a partner in life. His calm demeanor complemented mine, and together, we had built something remarkable. We shared a quiet moment of understanding, each of us fully aware of how much we had achieved together. He raised his glass, his eyes meeting mine with a smile that spoke volumes. To us, he said. I clinked my glass with his, the sound sharp and clear. To the future, I replied, my voice steady with the certainty of knowing what I wanted. As we sat there, the restaurant felt like a sanctuary, a place where the outside world could not touch us. It wasn't about the material things, the success, or even the recognition. It was about the journey, about the strength it took to stand tall after everything that had tried to bring me down. There was a time when I couldn't imagine this peace, this contentment. When every day felt like a struggle, when the weight of my past was so heavy I couldn't breathe. But tonight, none of that mattered. I had become something I could be proud of. I had become someone I could be proud of. The soft light from the candles flickered in the dim room, casting a warm glow over the table. It felt intimate, the world outside fading as I took in the moment. I looked at Alexander again, his gaze steady, and I knew that I wasn't alone. I wasn't in this fight for success by myself anymore. I had found my place, my strength, and my purpose. It was no longer about proving anyone wrong, about seeking validation from a past that no longer served me. It was about continuing to build, to grow, and to embrace the future that was waiting for me. As the night came to a close, and we stood to leave, I felt a deep sense of peace. The path ahead was mine to shape, and I was ready. No longer would I be defined by the ghosts of my past. I was Rachel Turner, and my story was just beginning. I walked into the office the next morning, the same confident stride I had carried through every obstacle. The sun streamed through the large windows, casting a golden light on everything. I had done what seemed impossible, and now, the future stretched before me, wide and full of promise. The company was growing faster than I had ever imagined, and the recognition I had once dreamed of was now reality. But as I walked past my team, I realized that it wasn't the accolades or the external success that mattered most. It was the impact I had made on the people around me, the way I had inspired those who had once doubted me, and the confidence I had helped cultivate in others. As I entered my office, I took a moment to sit in the chair behind my desk, the chair that had once seemed so far out of reach. Now, it felt natural. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. My phone buzzed with a message from Jessica. The investors are impressed. They want a meeting next week. I couldn't help but smile. It was another step forward, another confirmation that the work I had put in was paying off. The early mornings, the late nights, the sacrifices, they had all led to this. I was no longer just a survivor of my past, I was the architect of my future. As I looked out the window, I thought about Ethan. I had no desire to revisit the past, but it was impossible not to acknowledge that his influence had shaped my journey. Not in the way he had hoped. Not in the way he had intended. But he had unknowingly fueled my fire. And now, I was the one in control. I wasn't angry anymore. I had learned that holding on to resentment only weighed me down. I had let go of the past, and in doing so, I had freed myself to move forward. The door opened, and Alexander walked in, his usual calm presence filling the room. He looked at me with a smile, and without saying a word, he knew everything. We had both worked hard for this moment. Together, we had built something real. I've been thinking, he said, taking a seat across from me. We've made great strides, but this is just the beginning. There's so much more we can accomplish. His words struck a chord with me. It wasn't about resting on what we had achieved, it was about pushing forward, about continuing to grow, to evolve, to keep building. I know, I replied, my voice steady. And we will. We've only just scratched the surface. The future was bright, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. I had faced the darkest parts of my past, and now, I was walking confidently toward the light. There would be challenges ahead, I was sure of it. But now, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. And nothing, not even the ghosts of the past, could stop me. I stood in front of the mirror the next morning, examining the woman who had come so far. The reflection staring back at me wasn't just one of success, it was one of strength, resilience, and undeniable power. Every curve, every line, every scar told a story of battles fought and won. I had spent so many years doubting my worth, questioning whether I would ever be enough. But now, I could see it. I could feel it. I was more than enough. As I stood there, I realized that the work I had done to build my career, to rebuild my life, had also built me into someone I never thought I could be. The woman staring back at me wasn't broken anymore. She was whole, she was thriving, and most importantly, she was unapologetic. The phone buzzed on the counter, snapping me from my thoughts. It was a message from Jessica. Board meeting is set for tomorrow. They want your pitch for expansion. I smiled. It was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when my vision for the future could finally come to life. I quickly typed out a response, confirming my attendance and my readiness. The morning passed in a flurry of activity, emails, calls, finalizing details. Every step, every decision felt more deliberate now, more purposeful. As I left the office for the meeting, the weight of responsibility sat heavily on my shoulders, but it was a weight I welcomed. It was a sign of everything I had worked so hard to achieve. When I arrived at the conference room, I saw the familiar faces of the board members, some of them smiling at me with respect, others with curiosity. I knew what they expected, and I was ready to show them. As I stood at the front of the room, presenting my pitch, I felt the same surge of confidence that had been with me ever since that night at the gala. This was my moment. I had earned it. The proposal I presented wasn't just a business plan, it was a reflection of everything I had become. Every decision, every strategy was grounded in the lessons I had learned from my journey. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. The room was still, everyone processing what they had just heard. And then, one by one, they nodded. The approval was unspoken, but it was there, clear in their eyes. The board was behind me. As I left the meeting, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I knew the road ahead would have its challenges, but this was a turning point. I had proven myself. Not to anyone else, but to myself. I wasn't the woman I had been when I first started this journey. I was someone entirely new, someone who was no longer afraid to take on the world. I sat at my desk, the weight of the day behind me, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to relax. The board had approved my expansion proposal, the next step in my vision was coming to life, and the weight of responsibility now felt like a privilege. My phone buzzed again, this time a message from Alexander. "Dinner tonight?" "It's been a long week." I smiled, knowing exactly what he meant. This was a moment we could share, just the two of us, after all the chaos. I typed back, "I'll be ready." As the day faded into evening, I left the office with a sense of purpose that I hadn't realized was missing before. The city was alive, humming with possibility, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely in control. I wasn't rushing to prove anything anymore. I wasn't seeking validation. I had already earned it. The car ride to the restaurant was quiet but comforting. Alexander was already there when I arrived, waiting for me with that familiar smile, a silent understanding between us. As we sat down to dinner, I noticed the subtle changes in the way we spoke. There were no longer any uncertain moments, no more hesitation. We had both grown, in our own ways, and now, it was about enjoying the life we were building together. "I've been thinking," Alexander said, breaking the comfortable silence. "We've made a lot of progress, Rachel. But I think we both know this is just the beginning." I looked at him, the man who had been my rock, my partner, and I realized how right he was. This wasn't the end of anything. It was just the beginning of something even bigger. "I know," I replied, my voice steady and filled with purpose. "And I'm ready." The night stretched on, filled with conversation about future plans, goals, and dreams. For once, there was no need to dwell on the past. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what we were creating, what we were building, and the future that lay ahead. As the evening came to an end, I felt lighter, more at ease. The journey I had been on wasn't over, but I was no longer afraid of what was next. I was ready for whatever challenge came my way. The city sparkled below, and I knew that it was only a matter of time before I would make an even bigger mark on it. I had already proven myself. And now, I was about to show the world what I could really do.